Hey, this is Crand, and I'm here to teach you guys how to play Tribes 2. The primary focus of this video will be strategies to use as a capper and capture the flag, but since this is the first instructional video for this game, we'll start off with lots of basics. It would help if you play the training missions beforehand, if you're a brand new player, but either way, we'll probably give you all the info you need to get started. I'm going to assume that you've already managed to make your online account with Tribes Next and are able to see and join servers, so let's do that. We're going to join Goonhaven for a minute just to show you a couple things. Here we are. When you finish loading the map, you are placed into observer mode. Here you can fly around freely and look at things, or press spacebar to lock onto specific players. If you open the score screen, you can click on a person's name to observe them. When you want to join in, make sure you are in the free flying mode by pressing spacebar if necessary, then click your fire button. Once you spawn, you can move around, shoot, jet, ski, etc. Players with red icons above their heads are enemies, and players with green above their heads are teammates. And please do not shoot your teammates. The first thing you'll notice in this video is that my screen looks quite a bit different than yours will. Don't worry about that too much. I'm simply running some heads-up display scripts to rearrange all of my HUDs. Among them is the GUI keyboard, which I have set up to show the key that I am currently pressing. The keys you see are my personal controls, so don't be confused if yours are different. As I said, I'd like to start off with some basics of Tribes 2, so let's talk about loadouts. The loadout we will be using as cappers is Scout Armor, Spin Fuser, Grenade Launcher, Chain Gun with an energy pack and flares. To acquire it, first set it up on the inventory screen, then save it so you can easily select it later. After that, find an inventory station and step onto it, and you will be given all of those items. The Spin Fuser, which I will henceforth be referring to as the disc, is a must-have weapon first and foremost because of the mine disc. In Classic, mines can be blown up before they're deployed, and mine disking is simply throwing a mine at your target, then shooting it with a disc such that the disc explosion blows up the mine, and your target takes damage from both the disc and the mine explosion. This is something that you should practice at all times, no matter what position you play. For cappers, it's used a lot to help clear the flag stand right as you grab, but we won't get into that for a while. The grenade launcher is used because it is a great weapon for bombarding the enemy flag stand as you approach. If enemy defenders don't get out of the way, you can easily kill them with grenade spam on your entrance. There really aren't any other weapons besides the discs and the grenades that will help you strictly in terms of running a route, so your third weapon should be chosen based on what you're doing besides just capping. The most common thing is to hang around near the enemy base shooting deployed equipment as well as distracting enemies. I chose the chain gun simply because it is the most effective weapon in the game at killing people up close, such as enemy defenders. Another choice could be the laser rifle if you prefer to keep your distance, but either of those two are good and you should use whichever one you feel most comfortable with. However, any weapon other than those four is pretty much a terrible idea for cappers, and worse in every situation than any of the weapons I just mentioned. As far as packs, the energy pack is a pretty clear choice for cappers since most of what you'll be doing is jetting, skiing, moving fast, and the energy pack is designed to accommodate people with doing those things. The sensor jammer pack can be great on certain maps, like ones with thick fog, or in certain situations when you aren't capping, but for now we won't get into that. Flares are pretty much a necessity, because without them, a single missile will kill you instantly, and any number of players or turrets could be trying to shoot missiles at you as you try to cap. Now that we've covered what equipment we're going to use, let's move on to a skill that you can actually practice. We will be using mostly TWL and TWL2 maps for this video, since in general they're better than the maps that came with the game. Chances are you'll have to download them if you want to play them, and I highly recommend doing so. The map we're on now is TWL2 Ocular. The first thing you need to master is skiing, and the reason we've chosen Ocular is because it has very smooth terrain with really nice hills that make it very easy to ski. To begin, after you've suited up with the loadout we talked about, simply start skiing down a slope by holding forward and your jump button. When you hit the bottom of the hill, that's when you start jetting up the next slope, and keep jetting until you see the next slope after that you want to ski down, and try to land on it. Keep skiing like this along hills for as long as you can. Don't worry if you go out of bounds, just keep going straight for now until you're comfortable with skiing. To help keep up your speed, always hold the forward key, especially when jetting and when you're skiing along the ground. It doesn't actually do anything if you aren't jetting or on the ground, but it's good practice just to hold the forward key anyway at all times while you're skiing. Another thing to keep in mind is that you don't want to jet after you reach your apex and start to descend. Ideally, you want to do all of your jetting in one long click during your ascent, and then free fall the rest of the way. Obviously, this requires a lot of practice and a good sense of where you're going to land long before you land there, so you might run into a lot of trouble trying to do that if you're not experienced. The most important thing is to make sure you land in the right spot, so if you have to do lots of jetting on your way down to ensure a nice landing, then do that. Just be aware that eventually you should practice jetting so that you don't have to do that. Another thing you've probably noticed is that I zoom in on the terrain a lot, and that's simply because it's always better to have a closer look at the shape of the terrain before you land on it. Practice skiing straight like this and trying to go as fast as you can until you are comfortable. If you can go thousands of meters at high speed without ever taking damage from hitting the ground, then you're making great progress. For an added challenge, you can also try practicing this without using an energy pack. That will really help you with learning to use your energy wisely. On to the next step, let's try skiing and actually using the terrain to change our direction. Changing your direction just by jetting is usually a bad idea, since if you're going at any decent speed, it's barely even possible to do so even if you expend all of your energy trying. As such, your direction is mostly going to be determined by the ground that you ski on. A great map for practicing skiing in this way is TWL2 Magnum. Magnum is pretty much nothing but bowls all over the place. Bowl is the term that most people use to describe a big curve in the terrain that can redirect your momentum. Practice skiing around this map just like the last map, except focus on landing on the sides of the bowls and using the curve of the terrain to change your direction. Ski down any slope to start, and then jet until you see a bowl that you want to land on. Remember not to try to change your direction in the air. Find a bowl that you can land on without having to expend lots of extra energy trying to aim yourself. When landing, make sure you land on the curve of the bowl at an angle that is tangent or close to tangent to the direction that you're falling. In other words, when you first come into contact with the ground, you want it to be a very smooth contact that won't instantly redirect you. The harder you land, the more speed you lose from the landing. Another rule of thumb is that it's better to slightly overshoot a landing than it is to undershoot it. If you overshoot, you might lose a little speed from a harder landing, but you'll usually be fine other than that. If you undershoot it and bounce off the terrain too soon, that bounce will usually completely screw up your route and you might not even be able to recover it at all. I suppose there are lots of exceptions to that depending on the map or the specific hill, but the main reason that I bring it up is you're more likely to undershoot landings to begin with, because if you're inexperienced you won't be as aware of your player's feet. It's your foot level that lands on the terrain, not your eye level. Be very aware of that as you focus on where you want to land. Continue skiing like this all over the place until you're comfortable. When you feel like you can land on bowls well enough, try to add some discretion to where you're going. In the last exercise, we had you just ski forward out of bounds without regard for your direction. This time, try to stay in the general mission area. If you go out of bounds, try to ski back in bounds using the bowls to turn yourself around. Also, just like last time, if you want to challenge yourself even more, ski around without using an energy pack. This will force you to decide much more quickly where you want to land because you won't be able to jet as long or as far. Once you feel comfortable skiing around Magnum, there is another mission you could try called TWL Deserted. The bowls on Deserted aren't as straightforward as the ones on Magnum. At first glance, in fact, the terrain here appears to be just jagged and awful. However, pretty much every point on this map is a good place to ski to change your direction. Practice skiing on this map just as you did on Magnum, and it should help you develop a better eye for good places to ski. Finally, before we move on to routes, let's talk about disc jumping. Disc jumping is simply a way to sacrifice some health in favor of speed. All you have to do is shoot the ground underneath you with a disc. It will take some practice to get the most out of your disc jumps, like where on the ground you should aim for depends on how fast you're going. If you're moving slowly, you'll need to turn around and shoot behind you. If you're moving fast enough, you can just look straight down, or if you're moving very fast, then sometimes you might even have to aim a tiny bit in front of you. The factor here is how far you're going to move in the time it takes the disc to leave your gun and hit the ground. Also, there are times when you won't even aim down to disc jump, such as if you're skiing along a bowl or grazing past the side of a hill. You can only do one strong disc jump for each time you respawn in light armor, so they are mostly only used in emergencies or on carefully planned routes. In any case, you should practice disc jumping while you ski until you can consistently execute disc jumps that give you nice forward propulsion. If they send you upwards with too much force, you need to aim the disc more towards your rear. If they don't seem to do much at all, then you need to aim a little further in the direction that you're moving. Once you're comfortable skiing around and doing the occasional disc jump, it's time to introduce the key component of being a capper, which is the enemy flag. Let's start by doing a basic setup route. For a setup route, the basic idea is to simply find a big hill somewhere that slopes down in the direction of the enemy flag. When looking for a hill for your setup route, also consider the location. The two factors you have to weigh out are how hard is it to get to your hill, and how hard will it be to start heading back to your base once you've grabbed the enemy flag. Hills behind the enemy base are generally harder to get to, but they give you an easier path back to your base. Hills off to the side are usually somewhere in between for both factors, and hills in between the bases are generally easy to get to, but it's harder to turn back to your base after the grab. Of course, the factors are highly dependent on the terrain and whether or not there are bowls you can use to redirect yourself, but what I said is true in theory.